Watch right now on the Front News Project. Explosions in Moscow. Dozens of drones attack the capital of the Russian Federation. Strikes in Tatarstan. Military facilities are burning. The offensive in SU 2026 has already been reclaimed. 400 square kilometers in the south, and this is just the beginning. And also, this Ukrainian missile will become a black mark for Putin. Now, it's not just the Flamingo. Fiery, hot, and floating. Watch footage from the front lines right now. Greetings, this is Volodymyr Tymoshenko with you, and we're starting right away with the main topic. Moscow is under attack by UAVs. At least 24 drones, the so-called good drones, attacked military facilities in the capital of the Russian Federation. And those same unidentified drones also attacked Russia's Tatarstan region. One of the key oil pumping stations, Kyiv, came under attack. A fire broke out on its territory. Our journalists will tell and show you all the details.
Bright explosions in Tatarstan. Guests in the capital of the Russian Federation. And an endless blackout in Belgorod. It seems the special military operation really is going according to plan. I wonder, is this what Putin wanted?
A thief should be in prison, but there are nuances.
Explosions where no one expected them. 1,200 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, Tatarstan. One of Russia's key oil regions came under drone attack.
Does it burn better over there or something?
We're talking about the Kyiv oil pumping station, one of the key nodes in Russia's pipeline system.
This is one of the main oil pumping stations in the Russian Federation, which accordingly handles the pumping and sorting of oil products for further transportation through the Druzhba pipeline. In other words, this is a key component of the Druzhba pipeline.
Belgorod has its own atmosphere too, and apparently the locals don't really like it.
It's just the talk of the town.
Moscow is the city where important decisions are made. A city that for years was assured to be out of reach. And now, more and more often, drones are appearing in the sky over the capital.
Moscow is paralyzed. The sky is closed. 100 Ukrainian armed forces drones have turned the capital of Mordor into a panic zone. And
while UAVs are fully establishing order in Russia, Ukraine continues to receive support from its allies. However, it is only in 2026 that Germany plans to deliver the Iris-T air defense missile system and the Skyranger 35 air defense system.
We can say that Germany is a key military technical partner of the defense forces of Ukraine. It is also worth noting the deliveries of air defense missile systems from Norway. These are the highly advanced NASAMS surface-to-air defense missile systems, which are widely considered to be among the very best and most effective in the entire world today.
But Ukraine is not only receiving weapons from its allies, it is also expanding cooperation in weapons production. Recently, France announced an expansion of its partnership with Ukraine in the field of drone usage. I
Also traveled to Kyiv to try to work with the Ministry of Defense in very innovative areas such as drones. I think we will return to this issue again. It is really necessary to build a full-fledged strategic partnership on drones in a very short time.
This year, Ukraine will receive about 10,000 attack drones. All of these are products of joint Ukrainian-German production. By the end of the year, it is planned to open another 10 similar joint ventures.
We're already buying everything we can in terms of drones. We are already training our soldiers and will continue to improve our efforts every day to be better when it comes to drones, because this is part of the future, part of the warfare of the future, and in fact, it is already the present.
Ukraine is rapidly ramping up its own production of weapons and drones. One of the most notable achievements is the development of its own cruise missiles called Flamingo. But Kyiv is not standing still and is already opening up opportunities to export its own military products. Of course, first and foremost, meeting the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. The main directions for such cooperation are the Baltic countries, Northern Europe, Germany, and the United Kingdom.
European countries and the United States are interested in expanding military technical cooperation with the Ukrainian side. And the expansion of the sales market is quite remarkable. Ukrainian strike systems, first and foremost drones.
No one knows how much longer the war will last. Only one thing is clear. Putin's Russia will never achieve its goals. The Ukrainian armed forces will definitely drive the uninvited guests from their native land.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the blazing Pokrovsk front line. Fierce battles continue. On the Pokrovsk front, the enemy carried out 22 attacks. The occupiers tried to advance in the areas of the settlements of Rodinsky, Pokrovsk, Udakne, Filia, and toward the settlements of Belitska, Rishin, and Novopodhorodna, and also the defense forces of Ukraine. During the offensive in the south, they liberated 8 settlements and about 400 square kilometers of territory. Can we say that the counteroffensive in the Southern Operational Command has begun? And if so, what are the real prospects for the Ukrainian defenders? And what threatens the enemy's army? All the answers are in our next report.
The air assault forces of the armed forces of Ukraine have officially launched an offensive. A corresponding statement was published the day before by the Air Assault Forces Command. In this way, the General Staff essentially dispelled rumors and made an open statement. Ukraine is moving forward. The main task assigned to the units is to disrupt the occupiers' plans to advance in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions, as well as to defeat the enemy grouping and push them beyond the borders of Dnipropetrovsk region.
We can truly say today that the counter-attacking activity of the Ukrainian Defense Forces is happening now in the Huliaipol direction, in the Stepnohirs direction, and not only there. It's not just the southern front, far from it. Therefore, it is clear that Ukraine is using the resources and reserves we have, as well as the opportunities that have arisen, including by introducing a certain amount of chaos, such as disabling Starlink.
At the same time, a number of military analysts note that Russia is gradually recovering. Reserves that had been prepared for the spring offensive were redeployed from Moscow to the areas where the Ukrainian armed forces broke through. The occupiers are also partially trying to restore reliable communications on the front line. However, so far, neither effort has produced significant results.
There are several main reasons for the success of the Ukrainian attacks. These include the shutdown of Starlink, which resulted in the loss of stable communications for Russian troops, as well as the overall exhaustion of Putin's units in this sector of the front after prolonged continuous attacks. In addition, the Ukrainian armed forces took advantage of the weather conditions, the same fog that had previously played into the hands of Russian troops several times.
Another crucial factor in Ukraine's success was the level of preparation of Russian troops on the other side of the front line, or more precisely, the almost complete lack thereof. Well,
I'll say it plainly, 80% of them are untrained troops. These are people they gathered from various villages under different pretexts, mobilization, recruitment, pressure, and accordingly they are thrown into battle.
it is also worth noting the discussions about the liberation by the Ukrainian armed forces. The military has now officially confirmed the liberation of hundreds of square kilometers of Ukraine as well. For example, the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, stated that more than 300 square kilometers have already been liberated, and the advance of our fighters continues.
Ukrainian forces are counterattacking along a broad front, approximately 30 kilometers from Varvarivka to Ternovadov. If the entire stretch is cleared of infiltrated Russian soldiers, that's exactly what you get. 300 square kilometers.
The command notes that information about the advance of the Ukrainian armed forces is announced with a delay so as not to jeopardize operations, as has happened in the past. But even what has already been made public allows for cautious predictions that the successes of the defense forces may help thwart Putin's major spring offensive.
It can be said that Ukraine, again, I'm not getting ahead of myself because the security of the military operation currently underway is paramount, has managed, in my view, at least for now, to make adjustments to the conduct of the Zaporizhia or Kyiv offensive operation of the Russian Federation. And here there really are three key points.
As has already been noted, alongside the advancing assault units of the Ukrainian armed forces, the drone forces are also showing excellent results, continually increasing enemy losses. And the fact that the occupiers are being forced to retreat has also debunked yet another myth of the Russian Federation. After all, people there do eventually run out.
If he had them, he would have already thrown in another 500,000 troops which simply don't exist in all directions. And he would have long since entered Pokrovsk and already taken Hulyapol and advanced on Zaporizhzhia. But that hasn't happened. In other words, he's not holding back resources somewhere or hiding them. As many people think, like, why is that? It's just that they simply don't exist. Ready, really.
By the way, the commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Syrsky, also confirmed in an interview with Le Monde that the war in Ukraine has moved out of a deadlock. According to the general staff, the front has started to move back, and in recent days there have been up to 50 clashes daily in the Hulyapole and Oleksandrivka directions.
And now we move to the Kostiantynivka direction of the front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. In the Kostiantynivka direction, the occupiers attacked 13 times today. They stormed the positions of our defenders near Pleshchivka, Sofyivka, and towards Ilinivka, Kostiantynivka, and Stepanivka. One battle is still ongoing. In fact, exactly 4 years ago, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And what has Putin managed to achieve during this time? Well, aside from the fact that the Kremlin leader personally sent 1,260,000 of his compatriots to death and injury. Watch our next report and draw your own conclusions.
2 or 3 weeks and it was all supposed to be over. As a result, today, February 24th, 2026. It has been exactly 4 years since the Kremlin's occupation forces began their full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
I have made the decision to carry out a special military operation.
This war has become the bloodiest and most destructive in the history of Russia and Ukraine since the end of World War II. In 4 years, the Russian Federation has lost more people than in all the wars and conflicts throughout the existence of the aggressor country combined. And with each passing year, the number of Russians killed and maimed in Ukraine only continues to grow. Meanwhile, the territories seized by the Kremlin are incomparably small compared to the losses in manpower. Despite the fact that in 2025 they managed to mobilize and conscript 406,000 people into military service, their total losses, including those killed and wounded, amounted to about 418,000 soldiers. The year 2025 became the first during the entire war when the losses of the Russian army exceeded the number of new recruits. Losses are increasing while the amount of territory seized continues to shrink. Throughout the entire previous year, the Kremlin captured less than 1% of Ukraine's territory, while in just the incomplete month of February 2026, the Ukrainian armed forces have already reclaimed more than 300 square kilometers.
Things are not going so smoothly for the Russians. They are facing serious resistance from the armed forces of Ukraine, and they are even encountering situations where the Ukrainian armed forces in turn are launching offensive actions. Since February 2022,
Russia has managed to inflict serious damage on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. This winter has been the coldest and darkest for Ukrainians, but it did not break them. In turn, Ukraine also carried out massive strikes on Russian energy facilities. From Belgorod to Smolensk, Russians also experienced what blackouts are like.
They're bombing us, right? Are we being bombed?
I really do not know.
Just last year, no fewer than 25 out of Russia's 38 largest energy facilities were significantly damaged by long-range Ukrainian drone strikes. In addition to this, the unusually cold winter clearly showed that Russia's aging public utilities are currently in an increasingly dire and dilapidated state. And all the money goes only to the war, not to repairs.
Catastrophic underinvestment in public utilities. We have a catastrophic underinvestment in all our energy structures. That is to say, every single time that unexpected accidents or emergencies occur in these various settlements, it is suddenly and quite unexpectedly revealed to the public that there is a local heating plant there, which has not undergone any significant repairs or maintenance since the old Soviet times, or some other similar kind of critical infrastructure failure.
To repair the public utilities in Russia's infrastructure, about 10 trillion rubles need to be invested. That's exactly how much the Kremlin spent on financing the war in Ukraine in 2025. Russians have also started to feel that they are the ones paying for the war in Ukraine as prices in Russia have begun to skyrocket. Well,
So, friends, how do we start the new year, 2026? That's right, with a trip to the salon. My husband went to the store. How much do you think it all cost? All of this came out to what? 3,000. Three grand. Did you?
We even see that now, even in the region, even chocolate. They hide it in special cases because the price tags have just shot up to the sky. It's 139 rubles. People have to steal.
At the end of September last year, the Russian Finance Minister Silvanov explained the increase of VAT from 20 to 22% as a measure to fight inflation. But after the introduction of the new VAT, he directly stated all Russians must pay for the war in Ukraine.
We need additional spending on defense and security. Today, this is the main priority, the main task of our country. And in order to provide the necessary resources, yes, we are changing the value-added tax.
It will take at least 2 to 3 years to make up for those lost years that were simply taken away from the civilian sector. All the resources, once again, tanks, people don't buy them, missiles, people don't buy them, but that's exactly what's being produced. Naturally, prices are rising for what isn't being produced.
International sanctions and the ban on the sale of hydrocarbons, strikes on the oil refining industry, budget deficits, rising prices, colossal losses among the male population, as well as an increase in banditry from the so-called returning heroes of the special military operation. This is by no means a complete list of the problems that Russia has faced after attacking Ukraine. In response, since 2014, Russia has occupied less than 20% of Ukraine's territory, becoming a global pariah.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the Alexandrovka front. The Russian world continues here as well to destroy, kill, and maim. On the Alexandrovka front, Ukrainian units repelled 6 attacks by the occupiers in the areas of several settlements, Stepov, Kalinivska, Ternov, and towards Novozaporizhzhia. The areas of the settlements of Pokrovsky and Prosyan were subjected to airstrikes. A breakthrough in rocket engineering. Ukrainian engineers have created a ballistic missile, and now the armed forces of Ukraine no longer need to obtain external permissions to use this weapon on Russian territory. A similar situation applies to the Flamingo missile, which has proven to be highly effective in destroying targets deep behind enemy lines. By the way, British engineers have also joined the process. Russia, get ready for us. Here are the details.
The Ukrainian missile, which today is feared not only by our enemies, but thanks to its accuracy and low production cost, is even causing concern among Kyiv's partners. In February 2022, we asked our Western partners to close the airspace over Ukraine. But by February 2026, it is Europe that is asking Ukraine to share its unique experience. How can this be done independently?
It's a very simple technology. There's nothing complicated needed here. There are plenty of books written about this, where everything is explained, how it's done, what's so difficult about it.
As it turns out, modern American and European air defense technologies have a huge drawback. Their cost, even though Western weaponry is technologically unmatched, given today's realities of warfare, NATO will only be able to defend against enemy missile drones for a few days. The West simply doesn't have enough resources for anything more. After all, each of their missiles is dozens, if not hundreds of times more expensive than the drones they are used to destroy.
Currently, intercepting an Iskander costs over $6 million.
And here, Ukraine comes to the West's aid with its unique Flamingo missile.
You want to bring this down to $1 million or $1.5 million so that intercepting an Iskander would cost that much.
Using the FP9 missile with...
Using the FP7 missile?
The Ukrainian Flamingo is already demonstrating unprecedented effectiveness and accuracy. Attacking strategic targets in Russia, this missile, developed in record time, has become yet another headache for Putin and his generals. Since the development is entirely domestic, the Ukrainian armed forces do not need any permission. They can strike with the Flamingo wherever and whenever they want. The only problem our developers have to contend with is scaling up. So far, it has not been possible to produce a sufficient number of missiles per month for the Ukrainian armed forces.
This is strategic weaponry. Unfortunately, strategic weapons can't be bought or launched like hotcakes these days. Not in the same quantities as FPV drones, for example, so that everyone can see the effect. and so that it reaches every household. But based on the missions that have been carried out so far, we see that it fully meets expectations. It fulfills the tasks we set for it.
Since there still aren't enough domestic missiles to strike all targets on Russian territory, our Western partners have to help with this as well. For example, the United Kingdom is developing a new deep strike ballistic missile for Ukraine.
We can state that first and foremost we're talking about a missile that can be quickly scaled up and is a relatively inexpensive solution, since the government of the United Kingdom is specifically emphasizing that it should be a cost-effective means. In other words, it should meet the demands of the current time, as we see that the armed forces need a lot of such means. And it can't be too expensive.
As a result, within the framework of the Nightfall project, Britain announced a competition for the accelerated development of ballistic missiles. These are intended for combat operations under conditions of high threat and strong electromagnetic interference. The modern British missile will be able to launch from various platforms, carry out a series of launches, and leave its position within a few minutes. The system will be equipped with a 200-kilogram high-explosive warhead. It will feature high accuracy and a range of up to 1,000 kilometers.
500 kilometers. This completely covers all the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine. It also covers a significant portion of the European part of the Russian Federation. And at this depth, the enemy positions its higher level headquarters, meaning from brigade level up to divisional, as well as army and group of forces levels. These are also quite significant logistical hubs. In other words, these are places where fuel and lubricants as well as ammunition depots are concentrated.
In combination with the Ukrainian Flamingo, the British missile could significantly reduce the Kremlin's and personally Putin's desire to continue their campaign. Instead of missile strikes on peaceful Ukrainian cities, the bunker dweller will be forced to endlessly defend against the missiles of the Ukrainian armed forces.
The number and intensity of operations by our security forces using strike drones, including against strategic targets, are wearing down the enemy's air defense forces, the enemy. And the combination of ballistic weapons and strike drones can deliver targeted strikes against specific enemy assets that are critically important to them.
And from here on out, things will only get worse, at least for the Kremlin. Ukrainian developers promise to reach the necessary supply volumes of ballistic weapons for the armed forces of Ukraine by the end of this year, while simultaneously creating more and more types of advanced weaponry.
This year is about ballistics. In 2 or 3 years, it will be about creating an anti-ballistic air defense shield over all of Europe.
And now, an analysis of the situation on the Kyiv front line. Let's be honest, this is yet another sacred objective for Putin and his entire clique. Accordingly, the situation here is also extremely tense. On the Kyiv front, the enemy attacked our defenders' positions twice in the areas of Primorsky and Stepny. The areas of the settlements of Tavrishiske, Kamishuvaka, and Veselyanka were hit by airstrikes using guided aerial bombs. The Kremlin is preparing a new wave of mobilization. This time, they plan to forcibly send 2 million Russian reservists to the front. How realistic is this at all? And is this new batch of Putin's cannon fodder capable of changing the situation on the battlefield? Let's figure it out together.
Russians are once again packing their bags, storming the borders, and fleeing en masse from Arefia. And all because Putin apparently has dared to launch a new wave of mobilization, followed by mobilization, sending people to their graves.
This will be done, and it will be done quickly.
According to a report by the Institute for the Study of War, the Russian dictator is already creating the informational conditions for the restoration of a limited staggered call-up of reservists. In this way, the Russian Federation is trying to compensate for the colossal losses at the front. We
do not consider ourselves responsible for the deaths of people.
There are a total of 3 categories of people in Russia who are subject to conscription. First, these are men aged 18 to 30. No matter how much the Kremlin might want to, they officially cannot be sent to combat zones. There are also citizens in the reserve, those who have already completed their service. But in order to call them up, a presidential decree on the next stage of partial mobilization is required, which the bunker dweller fearing public outrage will not do.
I want to apologize to you. I want to say sorry to you.
But there is also a third category of conscripts in the Russian Federation, reservists. These are the ones the Kremlin intends to mobilize to the front to plug the gaps in the defense. And now the Kremlin has remembered those very reservists.
It slipped out while I was speaking with the audience of military personnel.
In 2015, Putin created the so-called mobilization reserve. Currently, its number stands at 2 million people. Who are these people? They are those who have served in the army and have so-called military occupational specialties. After their mandatory service, such specialists were invited into the reserve, where they were promised a monthly allowance and supposedly nothing was asked of them in return. But that was only supposedly the case.
They are paid some money for this. Previously, it was a small amount. Now they promise to increase these payments. In return, reservists take on the obligation to participate in regular military exercises and to improve their combat readiness.
They were enticed. Now, during the autumn months of last year and again in December, the president officially signed and enacted a series of executive decrees, the fundamental core and primary purpose of which is that these reservists, that is to say, those individuals specifically included in the mobilization reserve, can now be sent to participate in so-called specialized military training and preparation camps.
But by 2026, through some simple maneuvers in the Russian State Duma, the concept of special training camps was blurred to such an extent that out of the reservists who had once signed contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense, 2 million Russians were reclassified as assault troops.
He won't just be sent to guard some remote military base or perhaps a strategic oil depot in Velikia Luki or somewhere else like that, but he could actually be sent directly to the front lines. For a very simple reason, because a person who ends up in the army essentially has no rights at all. Whatever the commanders want, that's what they'll do. And
the commanders, as we know, want only one thing. More and more new batches of cannon fodder are being sent to the front.
Can reservists be sent to the front? They can. Can they be used to replace those who are in rear positions? Yes, they can. In principle, reservists are a kind of resource that can be used in many situations. It's not necessary to send them directly to the front lines. They can be used to constantly create tension, for example, on the western borders by conducting some kind of exercises.
At the same time, as analysts emphasize, preparations for a limited draft indicate a shortage of new volunteers. And so Putin is taking a risk and making an unpopular decision. And
this, as I understand it, is something of an experiment to understand how people, those who are members of this mobilization reserve, will react, how public opinion will respond, and so on and so forth.
But regardless of how society reacts, there is still no talk of a general mobilization in Russia at this time. According to experts, the Kremlin is unlikely to decide on a new wave of mobilization. At least not in the near future. The previous one, launched in 2022, caused too much discontent. However, just in case, men have already started leaving Russia en masse.
That's all for today, but very soon on Front News, there will be new, unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, brought to you so that you know the truth. This was Volodymyr Tymoshenko. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.